The unseen passenger. The airport buzzed with life as a sea of travelers moved through terminals. To most, it was a space of transitions, families off to reunite, business people with briefcases and purpose, tourists chasing distant adventures. But for Agent Malcolm Gray, this bustling hub was the start of an intricate and dangerous mission. Dressed in a plain black suit and a crisp white shirt, Malcolm moved through the terminal with practiced ease. His demeanor exuded calm authority, his strides unhurried yet purposeful. Beneath his composed exterior, his sharp mind catalogued every detail. A child crying over a dropped ice cream cone, a man nervously checking his watch every few seconds, and a woman whose suitcase seemed far too light for international travel. For Malcolm, everything was a potential clue. He wasn't flying for leisure or routine FBI work today. His assignment was a delicate operation that could determine the fate of an entire undercover initiative. Nestled inside his carry-on briefcase was a flash drive containing encrypted files that exposed the workings of a shadowy organization known as the Phalanx. Over the past decade, Phalanx had woven its tendrils through powerful corporations, government sectors, and international law enforcement. Malcolm's mission was simple in theory: deliver the drive safely to a secure FBI office in Washington, D.C. Simple, except for the glaring fact that Phalanx already knew about the flash drive. And him. As he reached the boarding gate for Flight 401, Malcolm scanned the crowd of passengers. Every face was a question mark. An older woman knitting near the window, a teenage boy engrossed in his gaming console, a businessman typing furiously on his laptop. He noticed a flight attendant nearby, her bright uniform crisp and her badge gleaming. Her blonde hair was tied in a tight bun, her posture impeccable. She greeted passengers with a wide smile, but Malcolm caught the briefest flicker of unease in her eyes as they passed over him. Something about her felt out of place. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome aboard," she said warmly as he approached the gate. Her voice was practiced and professional, yet Malcolm's instincts stirred. He returned her smile with a nod, not letting his thoughts betray him. The boarding dance. Malcolm chose his seat carefully. 12B, an aisle seat, giving him a clear view of the main cabin and the path to the rear galley. He secured his briefcase under the seat in front of him, subtly anchoring it with his foot. Around him, passengers stowed their bags, settled into their seats, and prepared for the hours-long flight ahead. A man 2 rows ahead caught his eye. Late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a suit that looked a touch too new. He adjusted his cufflinks, his movements sharp, almost mechanical. Across the aisle, a young woman with oversized sunglasses scrolled through her phone, her posture oddly stiff. Both felt like puzzle pieces that didn't fit. Malcolm leaned back, feigning a casual interest in the safety demonstration as the flight attendants took their positions. The blonde flight attendant, whose badge read Emily Hayes, was stationed at the front. Her movements were fluid and deliberate, but she stole fleeting glances toward his section of the cabin. Malcolm caught her gaze once, and she quickly averted her eyes, her smile faltering for just a moment. The plane taxied down the runway, engines roaring to life as it lifted into the sky. The hum of the cabin filled with the soft murmur of passengers, the clink of seatbelt buckles, and the shuffle of magazines. Malcolm sat still, his senses tuned to every movement around him. A tense encounter. 30 minutes into the flight, the drink service began. Emily maneuvered her cart gracefully down the aisle, her demeanor a perfect blend of efficiency and charm. Malcolm observed her closely, noticing how she lingered slightly near certain passengers, exchanging what seemed like harmless pleasantries. When she reached his row, her expression brightened. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her tone pleasant but her eyes guarded. "Just water, thanks," Malcolm replied, his voice even. As she poured the drink, the cart jolted slightly, and a splash of water landed on Malcolm's lap. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Emily exclaimed, her hands fumbling for a napkin. She leaned down to dab at the spill, her movements quick yet deliberate. Malcolm felt the faintest tug near his briefcase and immediately stiffened. "It's fine," he said firmly, taking the napkin from her. He shifted the briefcase closer to his foot, his gaze locking onto hers. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of intent. Emily straightened, her professional mask slipping for a fraction of a second before she retreated with the cart. Malcolm's fingers brushed along the edge of his briefcase. It didn't take long to find the anomaly. A tiny, round tracker embedded in the corner. His jaw tightened. Hidden shadows. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane prepared for its long cruise. Passengers settled into their routines, some watching movies, others scrolling on their phones or sleeping. Malcolm took this moment of relative calm to act. With practiced subtlety, he removed the tracker and slipped it into the seat pocket of a man snoring across the aisle. He glanced toward the galley, where Emily stood talking to another flight attendant. Her body language was tense, her hands fiddling with her apron pocket. A small device, a signal monitor, no doubt, was barely visible in her grip. She frowned, likely realizing the tracker wasn't behaving as expected. Malcolm's focus shifted to the salt and pepper-haired man 2 rows ahead. The man was hunched over his tray table, writing furiously in a small notebook. From this angle, Malcolm caught glimpses of diagrams, circles, lines, and arrows. To the untrained eye, it might appear as harmless doodles, but Malcolm recognized strategic schematics when he saw them. The warning. Emily reappeared, this time without the cart. She walked down the aisle slowly, her eyes scanning the passengers. When she reached Malcolm's row, she leaned down, her smile tight. "Sir, may I have a word with you in the galley?" she asked, her voice low enough not to draw attention. Malcolm tilted his head slightly, feigning confusion. "Is there a problem?" Her eyes flicked briefly toward the briefcase before returning to his face. "Just a routine matter. It'll only take a moment." He stood, adjusting his tie, and followed her to the rear galley. As soon as they were out of earshot of the other passengers, Emily's demeanor shifted. The warm flight attendant persona melted away, replaced by a cold intensity. "We know what you're carrying," she said, her voice sharp but controlled. "This doesn't have to get messy. Hand it over, and you'll walk off this plane unharmed." Malcolm chuckled softly, leaning against the counter. "Messy? You just planted a tracker on a federal agent. That's already messy." Emily's jaw clenched. "You're not the only one on this plane working an angle, Agent Gray. If you think you're walking out of here with that drive, you're sorely mistaken." Before Malcolm could respond, the cabin lights flickered, and a muffled gasp came from the front of the plane. The salt and pepper-haired man had risen from his seat, holding a device with blinking lights. "All of you, remain seated," he barked, his voice cutting through the cabin. "This plane is now under my control. The sky's edge." The cabin was charged with a sudden, palpable tension. The passengers froze, their conversations and movements silenced by the commanding voice of the man now standing near the front of the aircraft. His salt and pepper hair, unassuming moments ago, now seemed to frame an aura of menace as he brandished the small device in his hand. A crude but functional-looking trigger switch with blinking red lights. "This aircraft will change course immediately," the man demanded, his voice cold and steady. "If you comply, no one gets hurt." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Mothers clutched their children, couples exchanged panicked looks, and even the bravest passengers appeared frozen. Malcolm, standing in the rear galley, exchanged a brief glance with Emily. Her expression remained unreadable, though her breathing had quickened slightly. The situation had spiraled far beyond her carefully laid plans, and now both of them were thrust into a high-stakes game none of the passengers understood. Malcolm's mind raced. This wasn't just an attempt to steal the flash drive. This was something bigger. The man at the front of the plane was a professional. His tone, stance, and command over the cabin were calculated, his confidence bolstered by unseen factors Malcolm had yet to uncover. "What's your plan now, Emily?" Malcolm asked quietly, his voice laced with sarcasm. He wasn't sure if she was his enemy or reluctant ally, but she was clearly involved. You wanted the drive. Didn't expect this, did you? Her jaw tightened. I'm not part of this, she hissed, gesturing subtly toward the man. My orders were clear. Retrieve the drive and leave no witnesses if necessary. Whatever he's doing wasn't in the plan. So, we're improvising now, Malcolm muttered, his mind working to find a solution. He didn't trust her, but for the moment, they shared a mutual enemy. The hijacker's demands. At the front of the plane, the hijacker raised his voice. Listen carefully. I am in full control of this aircraft. My associates are monitoring from the ground, and any attempt to interfere will result in. He gestured toward the blinking device, letting the implication hang in the air. The passengers were growing increasingly restless, whispers of fear spreading like wildfire. A flight attendant tried to calm a woman who had begun hyperventilating, but the tension only mounted. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, shaky but composed. Sir, this is Captain Reynolds. Let's talk about this. What are your demands? The man smirked, as if expecting this question. Divert this plane to Belize City International. You'll receive further instructions once we land. And tell your controllers to clear our path. I'll know if you don't. Malcolm leaned slightly out of the galley, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. From this angle, he noticed something interesting. The hijacker wasn't wearing an earpiece or any visible communication device. How was he so confident about being monitored from the ground? Either he was bluffing, or there was more happening on this plane than met the eye. Turning back to Emily, he spoke in a low, urgent tone. How many others are working with you? She stiffened. Just me. But I didn't sign up for this level of chaos. Malcolm narrowed his eyes. He had no reason to trust her, but right now the possibility of another operative on the plane was more pressing than her shifting allegiances. We need to get to the cockpit, he said. That device he's holding. There's a chance it's a decoy, but we can't take that risk. Emily hesitated. If we move, he'll see us. Malcolm's lips curved into a faint, determined smile. That's the idea. Chaos unfolds. Before Emily could protest, Malcolm strode confidently down the aisle, his movements calm yet purposeful. The hijacker's eyes locked onto him immediately, narrowing as the tall, composed man approached. Stop right there, the hijacker barked, brandishing the device. Sit down, or you'll regret it. Malcolm raised his hands, his expression neutral. Take it easy. I'm just here to talk. You have 5 seconds to return to your seat, the man growled, the blinking device in his hand trembling slightly. Malcolm took another step closer, his sharp gaze assessing every detail of the hijacker's stance. The man's left foot shifted slightly, as though he were unconsciously preparing to retreat. It was a small but telling sign. The hijacker wasn't as composed as he appeared. You're not going to blow up this plane, Malcolm said, his voice steady. You need it to land, don't you? That means you're bluffing. The man's lips twitched, betraying a flicker of uncertainty. Before he could respond, Emily emerged from the galley, her movements swift and calculated. In her hand, she carried a serving tray, which she hurled with precision at the hijacker. The tray struck his arm, causing him to stumble and momentarily loosen his grip on the device. That was all Malcolm needed. In a flash, Malcolm closed the distance, grabbing the man's wrist and forcing the device upward. A brief but intense struggle ensued, the hijacker proving stronger than Malcolm anticipated. The man twisted violently, managing to land an elbow to Malcolm's ribs. Pain flared, but Malcolm held firm, using his momentum to slam the hijacker against the bulkhead. Emily darted forward, grabbing the fallen device. Her eyes widened as she examined it. This isn't a trigger, it's a signal relay, she whispered urgently. It's broadcasting to someone on the ground. Malcolm's blood ran cold. Then this plane isn't the target. It's the distraction. A deadly revelation. As Malcolm subdued the hijacker, Emily hurried to the cockpit, where the captain and co-pilot were frantically trying to contact air traffic control. She thrust the device into the captain's hands. "This is broadcasting a signal," she explained breathlessly. "It's not controlling anything on this plane. It's sending data elsewhere." The captain's eyes widened. "You mean we've been compromised remotely?" Emily nodded. "If Phalanx has operatives on the ground, they could be targeting something far bigger than this flight." In the cabin, Malcolm restrained the hijacker with improvised ties. He leaned in close, his voice a low growl. "Who are you signaling? What's the real target?" The man's expression twisted into a chilling smile. "You'll never stop it. By the time you land, the damage will already be done." Malcolm grabbed the man by the collar. "What's the target?" he demanded, his patience fraying. The hijacker let out a rasping laugh. "Washington. The conference. They'll never see it coming. A race against time." Malcolm's mind raced. The flash drive he carried contained critical intelligence on Phalanx of operations, including details about an upcoming international security summit in Washington. If the hijacker was telling the truth, the summit itself was now in imminent danger. Returning to the cockpit, Malcolm relayed the information to the captain. "We need to alert the authorities in Washington. This isn't just about the plane anymore. It's an attack on the summit." The captain nodded grimly. "I'll notify air traffic control. We'll expedite the landing." Emily stood nearby, her face pale but resolute. "What do we do when we land? Phalanx will have people waiting. They won't let you walk off that plane with the drive." Malcolm met her gaze, his expression hard and determined. "Then we fight." Descent into danger. The plane's engines roared as it descended toward the Washington, D.C. skyline. The turbulence rattled the cabin, mirroring the tension gripping every passenger on board. Malcolm Gray stood in the cockpit, his mind racing through the layers of danger unraveling before him. The hijacker's cryptic words replayed in his mind. Washington. The conference. They'll never see it coming. The flash drive in his possession wasn't just a tool to dismantle Phalanx. It was now a lifeline to prevent a catastrophic attack. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds frantically coordinated with air traffic control. "This is Flight 401, requesting emergency clearance to land immediately. We have a potential terrorist threat on board. Repeat, emergency clearance required." The static-filled response came seconds later. "Flight 401, you're cleared for runway 27. FBI and Homeland Security are being notified. Expect interception upon landing." Malcolm leaned over the comms, his tone sharp. "We don't have time for protocol delays. Tell the FBI they need to secure the International Security Summit. Now." The co-pilot turned to Malcolm, his face pale but determined. "What's the plan when we land?" "They're going to be waiting for you. And for that drive." Malcolm's jaw tightened. He wasn't just concerned about who might be waiting outside the plane. He also wasn't convinced all threats on board had been neutralized. "You keep this plane on the ground long enough for me to get to the terminal. Delay the deboarding if you have to." Emily, standing just behind Malcolm, crossed her arms, her face etched with tension. "And how do you plan on making it past a swarm of Phalanx operatives?" Malcolm turned to her, his expression steely. "I don't plan on avoiding them." The calm before the landing. Back in the cabin, the hijacker sat restrained in her rear seat. Malcolm had used zip ties from the flight's emergency kit to bind his hands and ankles, but his smirk remained intact, as though victory was still within his grasp. Nearby, a flight attendant kept watch, her nervous eyes darting between the passengers and the subdued man. "I hope you know how to fight," Malcolm said to Emily as they left the cockpit, returning to the galley. She scoffed, though her tone carried a mix of apprehension and resolve. "I've trained in more than serving coffee and peanuts, but I don't see how we make it off this plane alive." "Simple," Malcolm replied, his voice low. "We don't wait for them to bring the fight to us." Emily's brow furrowed, and Malcolm continued. "Phalanx doesn't just rely on brute force. They're subtle, calculating. They'll try to control the narrative, make us look like the threat, We need to throw them off balance before they can organize. Emily leaned against the counter, her expression skeptical. And what happens if this summit is already compromised? If they've already planted people inside? They're not ready yet, Malcolm said with confidence. The flash drive has the final pieces of their operation. Without it, they're scrambling, just like we are. That's our leverage. A sudden disruption. As the plane descended further, the cabin lights flickered. A low murmur rippled through the passengers, who were already on edge. Malcolm tensed, his eyes scanning the cabin for anything unusual. The lights flickered again, then stabilized. Emily glanced toward him, her voice hushed. That's not turbulence. Someone's tampering with the electrical system. Stay here, Malcolm ordered, moving quickly toward the rear of the plane. Reaching the hijacker's seat, Malcolm found the attendant still watching over him. The man had stopped smirking, his eyes closed as if meditating. Everything quiet. Malcolm asked the attendant, who nodded nervously. Malcolm's instincts told him otherwise. Stepping closer to the restrained man, he noticed something subtle. His restrained hands twitched rhythmically, and a faint buzzing sound emanated from beneath the seat. Move, Malcolm barked, pulling the attendant away just as a sharp crackle of electricity burst from under the seat. Sparks flew, and a faint puff of smoke began to rise. Malcolm reached down and yanked a small palm-sized device from beneath the seat. It was a transmitter, a backup relay device designed to interface with a larger system. Its purpose was clear: to send a signal despite disruptions. The hijacker opened his eyes and grinned. Too late, Agent Gray. The signal's already gone out. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He smashed the device against the armrest, crushing it under his boot. The hijacker only laughed. You think that was the only one? He sneered. You think this plane is the only target? The words hit Malcolm like a blow. He turned to Emily, who had arrived just in time to hear the hijacker's taunt. We need to sweep the plane, Malcolm said. Every bag, every compartment, racing against the clock. The plane landed with a jarring thud, its tires screeching against the tarmac. Emergency vehicles flanked the aircraft as it slowed to a stop on the runway, their red and blue lights painting the night in sharp flashes. Inside, the tension was unbearable. Listen up, Malcolm barked, standing in the aisle. His voice cut through the murmur of frightened passengers. This is a federal investigation. No one leaves this plane until we secure it. Passengers looked confused and afraid, but none dared challenge him. Emily began moving through the aisles with the other attendants, checking overhead bins and compartments for any suspicious items. Anything that looks out of place, you tell me immediately, she instructed. Meanwhile, Malcolm returned to the hijacker, who now seemed more amused than ever. What's the real plan? Malcolm growled. What's Phalanx doing at the summit? The man only smiled. You'll see, or maybe you won't. Malcolm felt a surge of frustration, but knew better than to waste time interrogating him further. Whatever the summit attack involved, the answer wasn't going to come from a loyal operative, a new enemy on the ground. As Malcolm coordinated the plane sweep, his comms buzzed. A voice crackled through, tense and urgent. Agent Gray, this is Field Command. We have multiple operatives approaching the runway. It's Phalanx. They're posing as emergency responders. Do not let them board, Malcolm snapped. Secure the perimeter. This plane is still compromised. Understood, but they're armed, the voice replied. Be prepared for escalation. Malcolm relayed the update to Emily. They're coming for the drive. Stay close. Outside, chaos erupted as FBI agents engaged with the disguised operatives. Gunfire echoed across the tarmac, and the flickering lights of emergency vehicles cast long shadows over the unfolding scene. Inside, passengers huddled in fear as the flight crew worked to maintain order. Emily turned to Malcolm, her voice sharp. What now? We can't hold out forever. Malcolm pulled the flash drive from his pocket, his expression grim. We don't hold out. We take the fight to them. The breach. The blaring sirens, and rhythmic strobe lights of emergency vehicles cast the tarmac in a surreal, chaotic glow. Through the airplane's thick windows, Malcolm watched as FBI agents squared off against phalanx operatives, disguised as first responders. The pop of gunfire and the shouts of commands echoed faintly into the cabin, amplifying the palpable tension. Inside the plane, passengers whispered in hushed tones, their fear mounting with each passing second. Flight attendants did their best to maintain calm, but the illusion of safety was long gone. Malcolm stood in the galley, his mind racing. He turned to Emily, who leaned against the counter, her jaw tight, and her eyes scanning the cabin like a hawk. "We're running out of time," she said. "If those operatives breach the plane, this whole thing goes south." "They won't breach it," Malcolm said, though his tone betrayed a flicker of doubt. "Not while we still have the flash drive." Emily gave him a skeptical look. "You're betting on that?" Malcolm ignored her and moved to the hijacker still bound at the back of the plane. The man's smug grin hadn't faded, despite the chaos outside. Malcolm knelt, his voice a low growl. "Your friends aren't getting on this plane. Tell me how many more transmitters there are, and I might be able to keep you alive." The hijacker chuckled, shaking his head. "You think this ends with me? You think taking down this plane solves anything? You don't understand, phalanx. This is a symphony, Agent Gray, and you're only hearing the opening notes." Malcolm grabbed the man by his collar, lifting him slightly off his seat. "I don't care about your metaphors. What's the target? How many operatives are at the summit?" The hijacker's grin faltered, just slightly. Malcolm caught the hesitation and pressed harder, but before the man could speak, the plane shuddered violently. The lights flickered once, then went dark, plunging the cabin into shadow. Panicked screams erupted from the passengers, followed by the glow of cell phone screens as people fumbled for light. "Backup generator should kick in," Emily said, but her voice carried uncertainty. A moment later, dim emergency lights flickered on, bathing the cabin in an eerie red glow. Malcolm's instincts screamed that this was no ordinary power failure, an inside threat. Emily moved through the aisle, shouting over the growing panic. "Everyone stay seated. Keep calm, and we'll get you out of here safely." Malcolm's focus snapped to the rear of the plane. "Something's not right," he muttered, heading toward the cargo hold access hatch near the galley. He motioned for Emily to follow. As they reached the hatch, Malcolm knelt and examined the lock. It had been tampered with, a clean, precise break that only someone with insider knowledge could execute. "Someone's already inside the plane," he said grimly. This wasn't just about the hijacker up front. Emily crouched beside him, her face pale but determined. "We need to find them before they find us." Malcolm pushed the hatch open carefully and descended into the cramped cargo area. The hold was a maze of luggage, crates, and equipment, all dimly lit by the flickering emergency lights. He moved silently, his trained ears attuned to the slightest sound. Emily followed closely, her hand resting on the taser clipped to her waistband. As they rounded a corner, a shadow shifted behind a stack of crates. Malcolm held up a hand to signal Emily to stop. In one fluid motion, he drew his sidearm and stepped forward. "FBI. Step out slowly." A figure emerged, a man dressed in airport maintenance overalls, holding a crowbar. His face was slick with sweat, and his eyes darted around nervously. Before Malcolm could ask a question, the man lunged. Malcolm sidestepped the attack, slamming his forearm into the man's wrist and disarming him in one smooth motion. Emily stepped in, delivering a quick taser jolt that sent the man crumpling to the floor. Malcolm searched the man's pockets and found a small device, a compact detonator. His stomach sank. "They were setting up an internal explosive," he said, holding up the detonator for Emily to see. This wasn't just about diverting the plane. Emily looked over her shoulder toward the hatch. "How many more are there?" "Too many," Malcolm replied, his mind already working through their next steps. "We need to get this plane secure before the situation outside spills in." A perimeter breach. Above them, chaos was escalating on the runway. Phalanx operatives had advanced closer to the plane, their weapons clashing with the FBI's defensive perimeter. Two operatives broke away from the firefight, sprinting toward the aircraft's rear cargo door. Inside, Malcolm heard the faint clang of metal as someone attempted to breach the hold from the outside. He exchanged a glance with Emily. "They're coming in." Without hesitation, he climbed back through the hatch into the galley. Emily followed, and they quickly barricaded the cargo hatch with a beverage cart. It wouldn't hold long, but it would buy them precious seconds. "We can't keep playing defense," Emily said, her voice taut with urgency. "What's the plan, Malcolm?" He grabbed the flash drive from his jacket pocket and held it up. "This is what they want. If we keep it out of their hands, we win. But to do that, we need to get it off this plane." Emily's eyes widened. "You're not seriously thinking about leaving this plane with all those operatives out there?" "I'm not thinking about leaving," Malcolm corrected. "I'm thinking about drawing them out. If they think I've escaped with the drive, they'll follow me. That gives you and the crew time to secure the passengers." She shook her head. "That's a suicide mission." "Maybe," Malcolm admitted. "But if we don't act now, they'll kill everyone on board." The decoy plan. Malcolm moved swiftly to the emergency exit over the left wing. "Get the passengers ready to deboard when the FBI secures the plane," he told Emily. "Don't let them move until it's safe." Before she could argue, he opened the hatch. Wind rushed into the cabin, carrying the deafening roar of the jet engines and the chaos from the tarmac. Malcolm climbed out onto the wing, crouching low to avoid being seen. He pulled out a second flash drive, a decoy he'd prepared for emergencies like this, and waved it in clear view of the operatives below. They spotted him immediately, shouting and pointing. "There he is. He's got the drive," one of them yelled. Malcolm slid off the wing, landing hard on the tarmac. Pain shot through his knees, but he pushed forward, sprinting toward the airport's maintenance hangars. Behind him, 3 operatives broke away from the firefight and gave chase. A dangerous game. The chase through the hangars was a deadly game of cat and mouse. Malcolm used every ounce of his training to stay ahead, ducking behind crates and equipment while keeping the operatives close enough to follow the decoy. He knew the real flash drive was still safe on the plane, but he had to make them believe otherwise. One operative closed in, raising his weapon. Malcolm acted on instinct, grabbing a loose wrench from a nearby toolbox and hurling it with precision. It struck the man's hand, sending his gun clattering to the ground. Another operative lunged at him, but Malcolm sidestepped, grabbing the man by his arm and twisting it behind his back. With a sharp move, he disarmed him and sent him sprawling to the ground. The third operative hesitated, realizing he was outmatched. Malcolm didn't wait. He sprinted toward the hangar exit, where headlights from approaching FBI vehicles illuminated the night. The FBI's arrival. FBI agents swarmed the hangar, their weapons drawn. Malcolm held up his hands, showing the decoy flash drive. "Secure the perimeter," he shouted. "The real drive is still on the plane." The agents moved in, apprehending the remaining operatives. Malcolm leaned against a crate, catching his breath as the adrenaline began to fade. He pulled out his comms device and contacted Emily. "Status." Her voice crackled through the line. "Passengers are safe, and the cargo hatch is secure. But the hijacker isn't talking." Malcolm clenched his jaw. "He'll talk eventually. Phalanx isn't walking away from this one." The Shadow Network. Hours after the standoff ended, the runway was a battlefield-turned-investigation site. The passengers had been evacuated, unharmed but deeply shaken. The plane was now surrounded by a cordon of FBI forensic teams combing through every inch of its interior. Malcolm stood near the mobile command post, staring at the decoy flash drive still in his hand. The real one, secured in a tamper-proof case, sat inside the FBI's surveillance van, encrypted and untouchable, for now. Emily approached, her face lined with exhaustion. No casualties among the passengers. Crews shaken but intact. But the hijacker, still as tight-lipped as ever. Malcolm glanced toward the makeshift interrogation tent where the man sat under heavy guard. "They always talk," he said, though his confidence was thin. Phalanx operatives weren't ordinary criminals. They were zealots, their loyalty rooted in ideology and fear. Emily crossed her arms, lowering her voice. "We found something else in the cargo hold. A set of communication devices wired into the plane's systems. It looks like they were broadcasting live during the entire hijacking." Malcolm stiffened. "Broadcasting to who?" She hesitated. "We're still working on tracing the signal, but the encryption is advanced. This isn't your garden-variety mercenary group." Malcolm knew what she was implying. Phalanx wasn't just a network of rogue operatives. It was a web, with connections to powerful, unseen players. Every move they made was deliberate, designed to spread fear and destabilize. The summit wasn't just their target, it was their stage. The interrogation. Inside the interrogation tent, the air was thick with tension. The hijacker sat shackled to a steel chair, his eyes half closed, as if the chaos outside was a distant memory. Malcolm entered, his footsteps deliberate. He dropped the decoy flash drive on the table with a clatter, watching the man's expression. "Recognize this?" Malcolm asked, his tone flat. The man's lips curled into a faint smirk. "I recognize a futile effort when I see one." Malcolm pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Here's the thing about Phalanx operatives. You all think you're untouchable. You think you're part of some grand plan, above consequences. But here's the reality." He leaned forward, his voice a razor's edge. "You're disposable." The smirk faltered. "Your friends left you to rot on this plane," Malcolm continued. "You think they care whether you make it out alive. You're a pawn, and pawns don't make it to the endgame." The man's jaw tightened. For a brief moment, Malcolm saw a flicker of doubt, a crack in the armor. "Help me," Malcolm pressed, "and I can make sure you don't get buried with the rest of them. Refuse, and I'll make sure the people you fear most know you talked anyway." The man's smirk returned, weaker this time. "You think threats will work." Malcolm leaned back, his gaze cold. "They're not threats. They're facts." Silence stretched between them. Finally, the man exhaled sharply, his bravado crumbling. "You think stopping me stops Phalanx? You're not even close. The summit, that's just the bait. The real operation, it's already in motion." Malcolm felt a chill. "What operation?" The man's grin returned, hollow but triumphant. "You'll find out soon enough." The decoded signal. Back at the mobile command post, Emily was huddled with a team of analysts, her fingers flying across a keyboard. Malcolm entered, his expression grim. "Tell me you've got something," he said. Emily looked up, her face lit by the blue glow of the monitors. "We traced the signal Phalanx was broadcasting. It wasn't just one location. It was sent to multiple nodes, bouncing across servers worldwide. But there's one point of origin we managed to isolate." She pointed to the screen, where a map displayed a red dot in Eastern Europe. "A private server farm outside Bucharest," she said. "Phalanx has used it before, but this time, the activity spiked during the hijacking. They weren't just broadcasting. They were sending instructions." Malcolm frowned. "Instructions for what?" Emily hesitated. "The summit wasn't the target, Malcolm. It was the distraction. A bigger conspiracy." The realization hit Malcolm like a freight train. The summit had been a diversion all along, designed to pull resources and attention away from the true operation. He glanced at the clock. Barely 12 hours remained before the summit was set to begin. "What's the timeline on that server?" Malcolm asked. Emily tapped her tablet. "We've alerted local authorities, but they'll need backup. If Phalanx is operating out of there, they'll be heavily fortified." Malcolm grabbed his jacket. "Then we don't have time to wait." Emily's eyes widened. "You're not seriously thinking about going there?" "Do we have a choice?" Malcolm shot back. If we sit on our hands, we lose whatever chance we have to stop this. The server farm. 12 hours later, Malcolm and a team of FBI and local counterterrorism agents stood outside the server farm, a nondescript concrete building surrounded by dense woods. The air was cold and the tension was palpable. Using thermal imaging, the team identified multiple heat signatures inside. Too many for a simple data center. This wasn't just a server farm. It was a phalanx command post. Standard breach, Malcolm ordered. We go in fast and hard. No time for subtlety. The team moved in, breaching the perimeter with precision. The first wave of resistance was immediate. Armed guards in tactical gear, their weapons trained on the intruders. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the forest. Malcolm moved with practiced efficiency, clearing corners and neutralizing threats. The team pressed forward, deeper into the facility, until they reached the central server room. Inside, rows of humming machines glowed with ominous red lights. Emily, who had insisted on joining the operation, plugged into one of the terminals. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "This isn't just a command post," she said, her voice tight. "It's a hub. They're coordinating multiple attacks. Dozens of them, all set to go live within the next 24 hours. Malcolm scanned the room, his mind racing. "Can you shut it down?" "I can try," Emily said, "but it's going to take time." The countdown. As Emily worked, Malcolm held the perimeter, his weapon trained on the door. The faint sound of approaching footsteps signaled reinforcements. Phalanx wasn't giving up without a fight. "Emily," he said, his voice sharp. "How much longer?" "5 minutes," she replied. "Maybe less if you stop distracting me." The first operative breached the door, and Malcolm took him down with a single shot. More followed, their movements coordinated and relentless. The room became a battlefield, the hum of servers drowned out by the chaos of gunfire. Finally, Emily shouted, "Got it." She yanked the drive from the terminal and handed it to Malcolm. "Data's secure, but we need to move. Now." Escape and revelation. The team fought their way out of the facility, escaping into the dense woods as explosions rocked the server farm behind them. Once they reached a safe distance, Emily collapsed against a tree, clutching the drive like a lifeline. Malcolm looked at her. "What's on it?" She hesitated, her face pale. "Blueprints. Names. Locations. This isn't just about phalanx. It's their entire network." Malcolm nodded grimly. "Then this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." The Hydra unleashed. The safe house was barely a blip on the radar, a weathered cabin deep in the Carpathian Mountains. Its isolated location made it ideal for debriefing and strategizing. Inside, the air was heavy with tension. Malcolm and Emily sat at a wooden table, the salvage drive resting between them like a cursed artifact. A satellite uplink hummed softly in the corner, linking them to the FBI's Washington headquarters. On the screen, Assistant Director Naomi Thorne's face was grave. "Tell me you've got good news," Thorne said, her voice clipped. Emily leaned forward, her laptop open. "We've decrypted part of the drive. Phalanx wasn't just planning scattered attacks. They've built a modular network, adaptable and self-sustaining. Each node is independent but connected, like the heads of a hydra. Cutting off one doesn't disable the others." Malcolm frowned. "How many nodes are we talking about?" Emily hesitated. "Over 100. They span across continents. Asia, Europe, the Americas. This isn't a group, it's an ecosystem." Thorne pinched the bridge of her nose. "And the targets?" Emily tapped a key, projecting a map onto the screen. Red dots lit up major cities worldwide. Critical infrastructure, power grids, financial hubs, communication lines. The plan isn't just destruction, it's chaos. They want to cripple global trust and cooperation. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "We need to hit them fast and hard before they go operational." Thorne's expression darkened. "Easier said than done. These nodes are scattered, well hidden, and heavily defended. Even with this intel, we're stretched thin. The message. While the discussion continued, Emily noticed something unusual on her laptop screen. A new file had decrypted itself. A video file. "Hold on," she said, silencing the others. "There's something here." She opened the file, and the screen filled with static before resolving into a shadowy figure seated behind a desk. The figure's face was obscured, their voice distorted. "Congratulations," the figure said, their tone mocking. "You've found the tip of the iceberg. But know this. For every step you take, we're already 5 ahead. You may stop 1 attack, even 10, but the system is designed to endure. Your world is built on fragile foundations, and we intend to shatter them." The figure leaned closer, their presence chilling despite the screen's barrier. "This isn't about power or politics. It's about a new order. One where fear is the currency and control is absolute. You can't fight what you don't understand." The video cut off abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. The new front. Malcolm stood, his jaw tight. "They're taunting us. They want us to know they're watching." Emily shook her head, her eyes fixed on the screen. "It's more than that. They're daring us to act, to spread our resources thin. They're counting on us to fail." Thorne's voice came through the uplink. "Then we make sure we don't. I'll mobilize international task forces, but I need you two to stay ahead of this. Dig into that drive. Find out where Phalanx's command center is. If we cut off the head, the body might follow." Malcolm nodded, determination hardening his features. "We'll find them." Into the abyss. Over the next 48 hours, Malcolm and Emily worked tirelessly, poring over the data on the drive. The more they uncovered, the more disturbing the picture became. Phalanx wasn't just a terrorist network, it was a shadow economy. They trafficked in weapons, information, and cyber warfare, leveraging the instability they created to profit and expand. One name kept surfacing: Cortez, a phantom figure tied to nearly every major node in the network. Little was known about him, but his fingerprints were everywhere. "He's their strategist," Emily said, exhaustion lining her face. "If we take him out, it'll destabilize their operations." Malcolm stared at a grainy photo of Cortez, the only image they'd found. "Where is he?" Emily brought up a map. "According to the latest intel, he's heading to Istanbul. There's an old Cold War-era bunker outside the city that Phalanx has repurposed. If he's there, he won't be alone." Malcolm nodded, his resolve unshaken. "Then that's where we go. The Istanbul bunker." The journey to Istanbul was a blur of covered flights and clandestine meetings. By the time Malcolm and Emily arrived, they were operating under deep cover, supported by a small team of local operatives. The bunker was hidden beneath an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, its entrance guarded by state-of-the-art surveillance systems. Using drones, the team scouted the facility. The interior was a labyrinth of reinforced tunnels and chambers, packed with armed guards and surveillance equipment. "This place is a fortress," Emily whispered, studying the live feed. "We'll need to disable their communications first, or we won't make it past the front door." Malcolm nodded, formulating a plan. "We'll split into 2 teams. One handles the comms, the other goes for Cortez. Timing is everything." The assault. Under the cover of darkness, the team moved in. Malcolm led the assault team, breaching the bunker's outer defenses with surgical precision. Meanwhile, Emily's team infiltrated the control room, using EMP devices to knock out the facility's communications grid. Inside the bunker, chaos erupted. Phalanx operatives scrambled to defend their stronghold, but Malcolm's team pressed forward, clearing room after room. The deeper they went, the more resistance they faced. Finally, they reached the central chamber. Cortez was there, surrounded by a small army of guards. He stood calmly, as if expecting them. "You're too late," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Even if you kill me, the plan is already in motion." Malcolm raised his weapon. That's a chance we'll take. Gunfire erupted, the chamber descending into a whirlwind of violence. Amid the chaos, Malcolm engaged Cortez directly, the two men grappling in a brutal hand-to-hand fight. Cortez was skilled, but Malcolm's determination gave him the edge. With a final blow, he subdued the strategist, binding his hands and securing him for extraction. The aftermath. Back at the safe house, Malcolm and Emily debriefed Thorne. "We've got Cortez," Malcolm said. "He's being transported to a black site for interrogation." But he wasn't lying. "The nodes are still operational." Thorne's expression was grim. "We'll take it from here. Your team did well, but this war is far from over." As the screen went dark, Emily turned to Malcolm. "What now?" Malcolm stared out the window, the weight of their victory tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. "Now we prepare for the next battle." Shadows of the Hydra. The black site was buried beneath a remote expanse of Arctic tundra, hidden from prying eyes, and shielded by layers of bureaucratic obfuscation. It was a fortress of concrete and steel, designed for one purpose: extracting the truth from those who would never willingly give it. Malcolm and Emily stood in the observation room, separated from Cortez by a one-way mirror. The captured mastermind sat at a cold metal table, his posture relaxed, his eyes sharp. "Charming accommodations," Cortez said, his voice echoing through the speakers. "I was expecting something more dramatic." Emily crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "He doesn't look worried." "He's stalling," Malcolm said. "He thinks he's untouchable." Assistant Director Thorne's voice crackled over the intercom. "You two are here for a reason. We need answers, and fast. Every minute we waste, Phalanx inches closer to their goal." The interrogation. Malcolm entered the room, his presence commanding, while Emily stayed behind the glass, monitoring Cortez's every micro-expression. Cortez smirked as Malcolm took a seat across from him. "Agent Wright, a pleasure. I've read your file." "Then you know how this ends," Malcolm said coolly. "You tell us what we need to know, or I'll tear your world apart piece by piece." Cortez chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't my world. I'm just a cog in the machine. Cut me out, and another takes my place. You're fighting a Hydra, Agent Wright. For every head you sever, 2 more will rise." Malcolm leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "And if I cut deep enough, there's nothing left to grow." Cortez's smirk faltered for the briefest moment. He shifted in his seat, his facade cracking under the weight of Malcolm's intensity. But then he recovered, his composure snapping back into place. "You think Phalanx is about chaos," Cortez said. "It's not. It's about inevitability. Your world is rotting. Corruption, greed, incompetence. We're not destroying anything. We're simply giving the fire a little more oxygen. A break in the armor." Emily's voice came through Malcolm's earpiece. "He's deflecting. Push him on the nodes." Malcolm nodded subtly. "Let's talk about the network." "The nodes. Where's the command center?" Cortez's eyes glinted. "If I told you, it wouldn't matter. The nodes are designed to act autonomously. Take out the command center, and they keep going." Malcolm's tone turned icy. "And yet, you were there, pulling the strings." "Someone has to keep the orchestra in tune," Cortez replied. "But the symphony plays on, even without the conductor." Emily's fingers danced across her laptop keyboard, analyzing patterns in Cortez's responses. "He's lying about the autonomy," she muttered. "There's a central node. He's just protecting it." A calculated gamble. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You're not as indispensable as you think, Cortez. We've already decrypted most of the drive. We know about the nodes in Tokyo, Berlin, Sao Paulo. It's only a matter of time before we dismantle the entire network." Cortez's smug demeanor wavered. "You're bluffing." Malcolm's silence was deliberate, calculated. Emily fed more data into the system, simulating false progress on node takedowns. She sent a live feed to the room, showing red dots on a global map turning green one by one. Cortez's eyes flicked to the screen. For the first time, genuine concern crossed his face. "That's impossible," he said. "You couldn't have." "Couldn't have what?" Malcolm interrupted. "Outsmarted you." "Looks like the Hydra's losing its heads." Cortez's fists clenched. "You don't understand. If you disable the wrong nodes, you'll trigger the failsafe." Emily's voice came through Malcolm's earpiece, urgent. "Failsafe? Get him to elaborate." "What failsafe?" Malcolm demanded. Cortez hesitated, his mask slipping. "Phalanx isn't just about destabilization. The network has a backdoor, a catastrophic protocol. If too many nodes are compromised, the system consolidates into a single strike, a global blackout. No power grids, no communications, no financial systems. Civilization collapses in hours." Malcolm's heart pounded. "Where's the override?" Cortez's lips curled into a cruel smile. "There isn't one. Once it starts, it's unstoppable." Race against time. In the observation room, Emily worked frantically, her mind racing. "He's lying. There has to be an override." Thorne's voice came through the speakers. "Find it, Agent Whittaker. If he's telling the truth, we're on a countdown." Malcolm pressed Cortez harder. "You're playing a dangerous game. If this fail-safe exists, you'll go down with the rest of us." Cortez laughed bitterly. "A small price to pay. The old world burns, and from the ashes, Phalanx rises." Emily's fingers paused as she uncovered a hidden section of the drive. Her eyes widened. "Malcolm, he's not bluffing. I found references to something called Project Acheron. It's a consolidation protocol. If we disrupt more than 70% of the nodes without disabling Acheron, it activates." Malcolm turned back to Cortez, his voice cold. "Where is Acheron?" Cortez's expression turned defiant. "You'll never find it in time. Unlikely alliances." Emily burst into the interrogation room, her laptop in hand. "We don't need him to tell us. We just need to make him think he has no choice." Malcolm glanced at her, understanding her unspoken plan. "You want to turn his own arrogance against him." "Exactly," Emily said, placing the laptop on the table. "If he believes we've already found Acheron, he might lead us to it." She pulled up a falsified feed showing a supposed infiltration team closing in on a remote facility. "Your failsafe is compromised, Cortez," Emily said. "And when we take it out, your entire operation crumbles." Cortez's face twisted with rage. "You fools. You think you can waltz into Acheron without triggering every defense system. It's buried beneath the Gobi Desert, guarded by." He froze, realizing his mistake. Emily smirked, closing her laptop. "Thank you." To the heart of the beast. Thorne's voice filled the room. "We've got a location. Mobilize immediately. This is our only shot." As the team prepared for the mission, Malcolm looked at Emily. "This isn't just about stopping Phalanx anymore. If Cortez is right, the entire world is on the line." Emily nodded, determination stealing her features. "Then we'll finish this, no matter the cost." The inferno below. The whine of the aircraft's engines was nearly lost in the howling winds of the Gobi Desert. Malcolm stared out the window at the endless expanse of shifting dunes, his mind a whirlwind of strategies and contingency plans. The team had been briefed on every possible scenario, but Cortez's warning about Acheron's defenses loomed large in their thoughts. Emily sat beside him, poring over schematics of the buried facility on her tablet. Satellite scans confirmed subterranean activity of the coordinates Cortez slipped. The facility's powered by its own geothermal plant. It's self-sufficient, completely isolated. "Which means it's also a fortress," Malcolm said grimly. "Any signs of external defenses?" Thermal imaging picked up automated turrets and motion-sensitive mines covering the entry points, Emily replied. "If we trigger even one, the whole network could go into lockdown." "Sounds like a warm welcome," Malcolm muttered. How's the infiltration plan holding up? Emily hesitated, then sighed. It's ambitious. Maybe too ambitious. Malcolm gave her a sidelong glance. We don't have the luxury of caution, Whitaker. If Acheron activates, it's game over. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Approaching drop zone. ETA, 2 minutes. The descent. The insertion point was a sheer cliff that overlooked the entrance to the Acheron facility. The team rappelled down in silence, their movements synchronized, their breaths measured. Malcolm's earpiece buzzed as Thorne checked in from the mobile command center. We're tracking you in real time. No signs of movement, but stay sharp. Cortez might have tipped them off. Malcolm touched his earpiece. Acknowledged. Proceeding as planned. Emily's voice came through next. I've got a clear feed on the facility's perimeter. Turrets are active, but their targeting systems seem calibrated for vehicles, not personnel. We might have a blind spot. Malcolm's feet hit the ground, and he signaled for the team to move forward. The entrance was a massive steel door set into the rock face, with no visible keypad or access panel. Emily knelt beside it, pulling a portable hacking rig from her pack. This might take a minute, she said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. If the door's linked to the internal network, I can piggyback onto their systems. Malcolm kept his weapon trained on the shadows, his instincts prickling. The air felt too still, the silence too heavy. Make it quick. We're exposed out here. A faint click echoed as the door began to slide open. Emily grinned, but the sound of whirring machinery wiped the smile from her face. The turrets above them swiveled, red targeting lasers slicing through the dark. Move, Malcolm shouted. The first trial. The team sprinted into the facility as the turrets opened fire, bullets ricocheting off the stone walls. Inside, the air was stifling, thick with the smell of oil and metal. The entrance slammed shut behind them, sealing them in. Emily checked her laptop, her face pale. The turrets weren't supposed to react that fast. Someone's monitoring us. Then we're not alone, Malcolm said. Stay alert. The facility's interior was a maze of corridors, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. Signs in multiple languages pointed to various sectors. Reactor, command center, cryonics lab. The deeper they went, the louder the hum of machinery grew. Thorne's voice cut through the tension. I'm picking up irregular heat signatures ahead. Could be automated drones. Proceed with caution. The ghosts in the machine. Emily stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. Wait, I'm detecting a secondary network. It's not just running the facility, it's reacting to us. What kind of reaction? Malcolm asked. She hesitated. It's adapting. Every step we take, it's rerouting resources, closing pathways. It's almost like it's alive. The ground beneath them shuddered, and a metallic screech echoed through the halls. A mechanical drone emerged from a side passage, its spider-like frame bristling with weapons. Without hesitation, it opened fire. The team scattered, returning fire as the drone advanced. Bullets sparked off its armored shell, but Malcolm aimed for a joint in its leg. His shot found its mark, and the drone collapsed in a heap of sparking wires. That's one down, he said, reloading. How many more can we expect? Emily scanned the area. At least a dozen, maybe more. Malcolm nodded. Then let's make every shot count. The heart of Acheron. The command center was a vast, circular chamber, dominated by a towering mainframe that pulsed with ominous red light. Screens displayed real-time data streams, showing the status of Phalanx's global network. Emily's gaze was drawn to a timer in the corner of one screen. Malcolm, she said, her voice tight. That's the fail-safe countdown. We've got less than an hour. Then let's end this, he said, moving toward the mainframe. Emily connected her laptop to the system, her hands trembling as she worked. The fail-safe is tied to Acheron's core. If I can overload the geothermal reactor, it'll shut everything down. Can you do it without triggering the fail-safe early? Malcolm asked. She hesitated. "I don't know." A voice filled the room, cold and mechanical. "Unauthorized access detected. Security measures engage." The screens flickered, and the chamber's walls began to shift. Panels slid open, revealing more drones. Emily cursed under her breath. "It's trying to stall us." Malcolm raised his weapon. "Then we don't give it the chance." The final stand. The drones attacked with relentless precision, forcing the team into a desperate fight for survival. Malcolm moved like a whirlwind, his shots precise, his commands sharp. Emily focused on her work, her heart pounding as she bypassed layers of encryption. Come on," she muttered, sweat dripping down her face. Almost there. One of the drones lunged toward her, its razor-sharp limbs glinting. Malcolm intercepted it, driving his knife into a weak point and pulling Emily to safety. "Stay focused," he said. "We're not losing you now." Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. With a final keystroke, she bypassed the last firewall. "I've got it. Overloading the reactor now." The facility trembled as the core began to destabilize. Alarms blared, and the drones froze, their systems shutting down. Emily grabbed her laptop and shouted, "We need to move. This place is about to blow." The escape. The team raced through the collapsing facility, dodging falling debris and bursts of steam. The entrance was in sight when the ground gave way beneath them, sending Malcolm and Emily tumbling into a lower chamber. Emily groaned, struggling to her feet. "We're not going to make it." Malcolm pulled her up, his expression fierce. "Yes, we are. Follow me." He led her through a narrow maintenance tunnel, its end glowing faintly with moonlight. They emerged onto the surface just as the facility erupted in a fiery explosion, the force knocking them to the ground. As they lay in the sand, catching their breath, Emily looked at Malcolm. "Did we stop it?" Malcolm stared at the distant plume of smoke and fire. "We stopped Acheron, but the Hydra isn't dead yet."